My fingers drummed impatiently on the table. I stole a glance at my watch and saw that the time was quickly approaching. If it were up to me, we would have left here already. Of course, if it were up to me, I wouldn't be in this position. I looked at my glass. Empty. As for his glass, well, let's just say he's been sipping beer for half an hour. My fingers continued to drum impatiently when I suddenly felt her hand on mine. Her thin fingers held mine. The touch of cool skin calmed me. I turned to look at Michaela, who looked at me as if to say, "I know, just a few more minutes." What she actually said was directed at the man across from us. "We're so glad everything turned out so well, Mr. Hume," Michaela said. "Matt, if you don't mind." "It's all thanks to you," he replied. "Actually, there are two of us," she said, turning to me. "Nate worked hard on this." He said, barely sparing me a glance. However, the client seemed ready to eat it. Michaela was a beautiful girl, but for this particular meeting, she also decided to wear an attractive and tight red dress. It was quite modest in some respects, knee-length, with just a hint of cleavage, but it still turned a lot of heads. Michaela always tried to dress well for her clients. We went on this trip together to complete the contract. The contract was concluded, signed, sealed, and delivered. But, as is often the case in this business, the chatter doesn't stop. It's not always that bad. Some of the clients had a lot of fun. On the other hand, this guy was most interested in mentally undressing Michaela. "You're lucky, Nate," he told me. "What do you mean, Matt?" "Great job, beautiful, life can be worse." Michaela and I exchanged glances before laughing. "We are not a couple." "I'm married," said Michaela, flashing her wedding ring. "And not with me," I quickly added. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just guessing from watching you guys last week. You two were inseparable. And all these common views, common food. I even saw you adjust his collar, Michaela." "I just want my colleague to keep a close eye on our most important client," Michaela laughed. "If I were your husband, I would be jealous of this," he said, pointing at me before adding. "Or vice versa." He let out a choked chuckle as Michaela and I faked smiles. This last joke hit me too deep. Looking at Michaela sitting next to me, sipping the rest of her wine, looking as chic as ever and smelling as great as ever, it was hard not to fall in love with her. And after working with her for the last couple of years, I fell in love. This was our first business trip together, and although we spent most of our time immersed in paperwork and cozying up to Matt Hume, I had to admit that there was something very tempting about spending an entire week together, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, spending hours on end in each other's company, and more than once staying late and drinking a few glasses. The illusion dissipated only when we returned to the hotel and went to our rooms. I've been married for a year now. I heard Michaela's voice when I finally woke up from my dreams. "What about you, Nate? Married?" Matt asked me. "No. But if you get down on one knee, Matt, I'll think about it," I joked. Matt laughed again. I felt Michaela's hand on mine again, but this time she turned my wrist so she could see my watch. Her eyes widened for a moment before she turned her customer face, as she calls it, back to Matt. "Well, Matt, it was amazing. But if Michaela and I want to catch the plane, we better hurry," I said. "Nonsense. You'll only have one more bottle left," Matt said, slamming his hand on the table. "That's generous, Matt. But the office will go crazy if we make them pay extra expenses. I am a client, and the client is always right. Give me an invoice." "What?" "Tomorrow you will board the plane. Give me an invoice, and I'll pay the costs." "I'll tell your boss right now," Matt said, pulling out his phone. Michaela looked at me pleadingly. She didn't want to be here any more than I did. I knew I had a choice, but I didn't know if I wanted to take it. But when I looked at her, and she looked at me with her eyes, I could not resist. "Well, Matt, I'm more than happy to stay here and have a drink with you under the table, but I'm afraid it'll be just the two of us. Michaela won't be able to join us." If Michaela was embarrassed, she hid it well. As for Matt, he could barely hide his disappointment. "She's rushing to her father's 60th birthday party," I explained. "Michaela's father turned 63 months ago, and she turned and stared at me. I ignored her and kept my eyes on Matt. "Oh, you're a good girl." Well, I can't stand between my daughter and her old man's birthday, he said. I turned to Michaela and said, "See you at work on Monday." Michaela smiled widely and gently placed her hand on my forearm before grabbing her purse and standing up. I turned to Matt and prepared myself for what could potentially be a long night, unless my gamble paid off. I looked closely at Matt and could almost see the gears moving in his head. Suddenly, he shook his head and said, "Ah, you better go with her, Nate. You are a good man offering to join me, but you have a more important role as a young lady's escort." I sighed to myself with relief. Outwardly, I said, "Are you sure? After all, today is Friday. I'm always ready for a drink." "Ha! I like you, Nate, but next time, don't wait for me to finish. You better hurry up." We quickly said goodbye and rushed to the door. I didn't realize it, but Michaela was looking at me the whole time. I didn't notice this until we went outside and stopped a taxi. "What? You're a really good friend, Nate." "What are you talking about?" I said, encouraging her to continue. "Were you really going to let me go and stay here with him?" "I knew you wanted to go home." "Yes, but it was very nice of you." "Thank you," she said, looking me straight in the eyes. Just looking at her made my knees almost buckle. "It's okay," I replied casually. "Are we really late?" "Not if we hurry. We'll go back to the hotel, grab our bags, check out, and then head to the airport." "Right. It sounds good. Do you think we can do it?" "Yes, don't worry, we can handle it." "Nothing worked out for us." "What?" Michaela exclaimed. "From here, I can literally see the plane. But they won't let us in. The doors are closed. We missed him." "No. What do we do?" "The lady at the counter checks when the next available flight is." "Are you kidding me? Do you have a better idea?" "No, I'm just upset. The plane is right here." Here it is," I said, as we watched the plane move away from the terminal. Frustrated, Michaela sank heavily into her chair in the departure lounge. I looked at my watch. It was already late. I looked outside and saw only darkness. The sun has long since set. It seemed almost impossible for us to get on another flight today. As often happens in such circumstances, I began to pace back and forth. "What are you doing?" "Sit down," Michaela said. "I don't want to." "Why?" "Because I've spent enough time with you this week to know that I need to give you space when you're like this." Despite everything, Michaela grinned. "Sit down," she said in a softer tone. I smiled, took my bag off my shoulders, and sat down next to her. Michaela said, "I should have listened to you. We shouldn't have had lunch with Matt. No, you were right. After all, he is a client. No, you just wanted to have a quiet drink together. It would be much better than having lunch with him. I thought he was quite rude to you." "Of course, but of course," I answered, chuckling to myself. "What does it mean? Does this mean you drink in this dress?" He got ideas. "What's wrong with my dress?" she said, smoothing out the wrinkles on the thin crimson fabric. "You look too cute," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And what? Do I need to spell it out for you? He is a horny old man, and you are an attractive 20-year-old girl." "Ugh, he is married." It wouldn't have stopped him. "I'm married," she said indignantly. "And I'm guessing that's one of the many reasons why you wouldn't sleep with him." "One of many," Michaela laughed, agreeing. "Then your hubby can rest easy." Believe me, he is not calm. I frowned in confusion. Michaela noticed the silence and turned to see my expression. She took a deep breath before grinning to herself and saying, "I've told him about you more than once." "What, in general or just this week?" "Both. I mean, we talk a lot at work anyway, so naturally you're involved in conversations. But this week, because of this trip, you just became close. I think he's starting to get a little jealous." "Why? It's not like we're sharing a hotel room or something." "No, I know. But yesterday I told him on the phone that we had dinner every night and that we understand each other well. He literally responded by asking if you had a girlfriend. Well, you won't catch me feeling sorry for your husband. Michaela chuckled before pausing to consider my answer. What are you talking about? Before I could respond, we were interrupted by airport staff. Sir, I'm very sorry, but there are no more flights on this route today. Damn, Michaela muttered next to me. When is the next flight? I asked, getting up. Tomorrow afternoon. Would you like to order 2 seats? I turned to Michaela, who sat with her arms crossed over her chest, silently seething with anger. The brief mirth, which I had managed to revive, disappeared, and she returned to that gloomy mood which I so hated. Michaela? I asked carefully. She nodded slightly. I turned to the employee, who immediately left to organize everything. I sat down next to Michaela again, but didn't say a word. I certainly didn't take it personally that she was so angry about the whole situation. Fun and games aside, it had been a very long and hard week. And while I might have found joy in being able to spend so much time with the girl I'd been so deeply in love with for years, I suspect Michaela wasn't impressed. It had just been a long week for her, made a little better by the presence of a good colleague. Maybe we can go back to the hotel? I asked finally. We can't do this, she exclaimed, more out of disappointment than anything else. What? Do you want to spend the night at the airport today? We have already handed over everything. They will give us rooms again. We left just a couple of hours ago. Michaela snorted loudly and crossed her arms over her chest. Given my feelings for her, I'd be lying if I said the idea of spending more time with her didn't excite me, although for obvious reasons, I hid my enthusiasm. Okay, we'll be back, Michaela moaned. Are you kidding me? Michaela blurted out. After the airport, she was in a disgusting mood. She refused to look at the concierge or me, which was probably for the best because a smile appeared on my face. We just checked out. Of course, the rooms couldn't already be filled. These rooms were booked several weeks in advance, the concierge explained. Your room is still free, but hers is not. I turned to Michaela and slowly asked, So? I'm not going to share a room with you. Let's go to another hotel, she interrupted. Do you want to go from hotel to hotel until we find a place? What are you going to do? Michaela, it's almost midnight. I want to go upstairs and sleep. Michaela gave me a disdainful look, causing me to add, I'll sleep on the floor. You can take the bed. That's very nice, she said with a weak smile, softening slightly. But I just don't think it's a good idea. Listen, we will do whatever you want. If you want to look for another hotel with 2 rooms available, let's do it. Otherwise, give me a pillow, and I'll make myself comfortable on the floor. She looked at me for what seemed like an eternity before she finally nodded silently. I smiled mentally before turning back to the concierge. By the time I took the access card, Michaela was already walking towards the elevator. We stood in silence in the elevator. We walked down the corridor in silence. They entered the room silently. It was approaching midnight, and we were both exhausted. I at least found some amusement in the current situation, but it was obvious that this feeling was not shared. Michaela didn't say a word, even as she pulled back the sheets on the bed, opened her suitcase, and took out her pajamas. I timidly approached the bed, silently grabbed one of the 4 pillows, and stared at the floor. Michaela, perhaps finally admitting that this wasn't an ideal solution for me either, muttered, Do you need a blanket? Or maybe we'll ask them to bring another one. No, it's really warm today. I'll be okay. Okay, I'll go take a shower. Do you want to jump into the toilet first? No. You go ahead. I'll just fall apart. She nodded, rolled up her clothes and a towel, and went into the bathroom. I muttered, I'm going to crash on the floor of my hotel room. Michaela could only grin weakly in response before adding, Thank you, Nate. You are a good friend. Having said this, she disappeared into the bathroom. Perhaps it was for the best, because if she had stayed to watch my answer, she would not have seen my smile turn into a bitter expression. Someone else would say I might be delighted. The bitterness was only intensified by the fact that the girl I liked was so unattainable. The fact that I heard the shower turn on and began to imagine her stripping naked and stepping into the hot stream of water running down her smooth, pale skin didn't help. There was nothing but a rather flimsy sliding door separating me from a naked and apparently very sexy Michaela. Alas, I stood stupidly in the middle of the room and felt the beginning of a very strong erection. It is not clear how to deal with it in these circumstances. Taking a cold shower was impossible simply because Michaela was inside said shower. Perhaps this whole missed flight and hotel room situation could be more trouble than it seems. This feeling only intensified when I threw the pillow on the floor at the foot of the bed and tried to get comfortable on the hard, cold floor. I lay on the hard surface for a while, listening to the murmur of the shower. Eventually my mind went blank, and I just waited for her to come out. I knew she would be fully dressed, but I waited with bated breath to see what she would wear to bed. I received my answer after what seemed like 10 or 20 long minutes. She stayed there quietly for several minutes. From time to time, the tap would open and I would hear her brushing her teeth or making some sounds. But otherwise, I just lay there and waited silently. When she finally came out, she was wearing tiny shorts and a thin t-shirt. They were pretty worn and faded with time. She was so casual, so homey, and for some reason she turned me on more than if she were in her underwear. Coming out of the bathroom, she looked down at me and smiled quickly before climbing onto the bed and asking, "Can I turn off the light?" To her. With these words, she turned off the nightlight, and we were left alone in the dark room. "Good night," she said unexpectedly, cheerfully. "Good night." For a second, I listened silently as she fidgeted in bed, trying to get comfortable. After a few moments, the silence became deafening, not only because it was night and we were about to fall asleep, but because it felt like we were both holding our breath and very aware of the other person. After a moment, I asked, "Hey, Michaela." "Yes." "Will you remember the time when we rented a hotel room together?" She moaned loudly. "I knew you would make it problematic." "Come on, this is funny. Relax, I'm not writing this live. This could be our secret. It would be better this way. Good night, Michaela." "Good night, Nate." It's hard to explain, but it seemed final. It was as if we had finally said our last words and could finally fall asleep. I tossed and turned on the hard floor, trying to get comfortable. The thrill of the situation was gone, and now the thought of trying to sleep on a hard, unforgiving surface almost made me wish we had separate rooms. I shifted into different positions and closed my eyes each time, only to awkwardly turn around 5 minutes later. After what seemed like an hour, I reached for my phone and discovered that less than 20 minutes had passed. This night promised to be long. I listened carefully and heard Michaela's quiet breathing. I dared to sit up briefly and try to see her from the foot of the bed, but I could only see a motionless figure under the covers. I lay down again and stretched heavily. I closed my eyes again, only to open them a few minutes later, still no closer to sleep. At that moment, I began to think about Michaela, and me and the long road that brought us here. At that time, we had known each other for more than 2 years. I remember how we initially had a cautious but fun conversation in the office when we first got to know each other. Then, being placed in the same work group, we got to know each other a little better, and there was a slow realization that with every new side of her that was revealed, with every personality quirk, with every hobby, with every little thing, I realized that this girl was perfect for me. I still remember the crushing feeling when I found out that she had a boyfriend. It was almost as bad as when I heard shortly after that she was engaged. I wasn't invited to her wedding, which was probably for the best. But since then, we have gotten to know each other much better. And while I wouldn't call us inseparable these days, more than a couple of people have commented on how close we seem at work. "Are not you asleep yet?" she suddenly asked, interrupting my train of thoughts. "Yes," I answered with unexpected eagerness. Suddenly the light came on, forcing me to shield my eyes from the blinding light. "Damn it! Turn it off, please. I feel very bad." Her voice sounded much closer, much more spontaneous. I allowed myself to open one eye and saw that she was lying on the edge of the bed and looking at me. "Then take an antacid," I grumbled. "I told you not to eat that shit at the airport." "No, that's not the point," she grinned. "Can you sleep down there?" "I tried until you turned on the light," I said, trying to sound stoic. "Well, if you can't do it on the floor, I think you can sleep in the bed," she said. "I can't force you to spend the whole night there." "Is it true?" Both my eyes opened. "Yes," she said. "Go." Not wanting to seem too keen on the idea, I slowly sat up, grabbed a pillow, and crawled at a snail's pace to the edge of the bed. I looked at her, dressed in a simple t-shirt and shorts, so simple, so unattractive, and yet so sexy. It took all my willpower not to smile widely. As I sat down, she grabbed a few extra pillows and began placing them in the middle of the bed. "What are you doing? What does it look like?" she said, continuing to build a wall of pillows. I laughed. "Do you really have so little faith in me?" "I'll let you sleep in the bed. Do not complain." "Do you think I'll start groping you in your sleep?" "I do not know." "Maybe." "Throw away these pillows. You know you can trust me." She looked at me silently for a moment. I saw that she seemed to regret her invitation, but nevertheless, she relented and destroyed the barrier of pillows, unceremoniously throwing them on the floor. "Okay, you're right, I trust you," she said. "It's not funny, I swear." "Good night," she said tiredly, for the third time, turning off the light before I could lie down. She immediately rolled over on her side so that her back was to me. I looked at her so close that it almost hurt. Despite my words, I almost instinctively reached out to touch her. Instead, I just lay down, put my head on the pillow, and stared at the ceiling. "Good night, Michaela," I said quietly. "Good night." Fourth time. Half of my body lay on the part of the mattress that was still warm to the touch. I stretched my hand across the mattress until I felt it sag under the weight of her body. I was just inches away from touching her. Even now, when we were both lying under the blanket, I felt the warmth emanating from her. I felt that I was becoming hard, and it was clear what I wanted. Instead, I was just content to stare longingly at her from behind. As if feeling my gaze on her, I saw her throw her head back. Not enough to look me in the eye, but enough that she could see me out of the corner of her eye. She didn't say anything to me, and I didn't say anything to her. "Nate?" "Yes?" "Will you remember this time we slept together?" I burst out laughing, and she quickly followed me. She turned to face me, and we looked at each other in the dark, laughing. "I'm glad you said it and not me," I said, through laughter. "I had to, so it won't be weird anymore." "I don't know. It's still a little strange." "A little bit. Of course, if you tell anyone about this, I will kill you." Silence. Especially my husband. "I've never even met your husband," I laughed. "I'm just saying in case you do." "What do you think I would do?" "Hi, I'm Nate. I'm the guy who slept with your wife once." "I already regret it," she chuckled. "Go to bed, Nate." "Good night, Michaela." Again. This time, she fell asleep for real. She turned over, closed her eyes, and within a few minutes was asleep. But I didn't sleep. At least at first. I just lay there, listening to her quiet breathing and watching her silhouette. I thought of all the ways I could make my dream scenario a reality. I could move closer to her, turn it over to me. I could pretend to hug her in my sleep, or I could just touch her if I was sure she was in deep sleep. I thought about all the options, but in the end, I just lay there until the sound of her soft breathing sent me to sleep. I almost expected her to appear in my dreams. It was like that before. Sometimes she revealed something deeply personal. One day she was drunk enough to tell me her favorite sex positions. She never struck me as a girl who liked the 69 position, and to be honest, it wasn't a position that ever really attracted me. But the evening she told me about it, she appeared in a particularly memorable dream doing just that. And yet, that night, I dreamed nothing. It seems almost wasteful to spend the whole night in bed with a beautiful woman like her and have nothing in real life or in a dream. And yet this is what happened. And so when I woke up the next morning, these pent-up sexual feelings had not diminished at all. When I woke up, I found the room filled with soft morning light. The sun shone directly into the room from the balcony through thin curtains that rustled softly in the wind, bathing the room in an unearthly, ever-moving light. I lay on my side, watching the play of light while I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. A moment later, I turned over and suddenly heard a quiet groan and felt someone sharply pull back their hand. I turned around to see Michaela curled up next to me, much closer than she had been when we fell asleep, but still far enough away that we weren't touching each other. I turned on the bed to face her. We lay face to face, so close that I could almost feel her breath on me. I was close enough to see every pore, every line, every blemish on her face. Even after a night's sleep and without makeup, she was beautiful. A couple of strands of hair fell into her face. They hung there, teasing me. Almost instinctively, I reached up and tucked some strands behind her ear. That was all I dared. Of course, I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know and was afraid that everything would be bad if I started running my hands over my body or stealing a kiss or anything else that came into my head. And yet, here I was, my hands slowly creeping under the sheets and across the bed. My mind was screaming to stop, but my willpower was completely broken. I needed contact, any contact, something to bridge this distance between us, some glimpse of what it was like to be with her. Finally, I felt my fingertips touch my body, but where I expected to touch the fabric of her shirt, I found myself touching bare skin. I lightly ran my fingers over what I now realized was my stomach before I felt my knuckles unmistakably touch my lower chest. My shirt must have ridden up my chest somewhere during the night, but I couldn't see because of the sheets. This very short touch acted on me like an electric shock. I almost immediately recoiled, jumped out of bed, and headed straight to the bathroom. I splashed water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. The face that looked at me was a strange mixture of shame and lust. I lowered the toilet lid, sat on it, and pulled myself together. It was one thing to find pleasure in the ridiculous situation in which I found myself. It's quite another to pester a colleague or friend in a dream. Then I noticed that she had left her wristwatch near the wash basin. The time showed 5:45. It was still early. Most likely, she will wake up only in a few hours, and I couldn't hide in the bathroom all this time. And I felt tired. I knew I wanted to go back to bed, although I didn't know if I had the strength to hold back. It took a few more minutes before I felt comfortable enough to leave the bathroom. I walked out with trepidation and found it exactly where I had left it. I stood by the bed for a moment, looking down at her, before deciding to crawl back under the sheets. I lay down, put my head on the pillow, and turned to see that she was still facing me, inches away. She was basically lying in the middle of the mattress. I debated whether to push her back onto her side, but before I could do so, she stirred in her sleep and suddenly hugged me and pressed herself against me so that our bodies were touching. "Oh, damn it," I muttered under my breath. Several things happened at once. Her right leg began to rub against mine and weaved itself between my legs. I felt the unmistakable touch of her chest pressed against my hand, and she laid her head on my shoulder. I froze for a moment until I was sure she was sleeping, and even then, I didn't dare move. After what seemed like an eternity, but which was probably only a minute or two, I felt a sudden urge to free my right hand. I wondered if this was truly a consolation or if I just wanted to take this ridiculous next step. I convinced myself it was just for comfort and carefully removed my right hand so as not to wake her. Almost instinctively, she moved in her sleep to put her head closer to her chest, and my hand had no choice but to curl around her shoulder, down her back, placing my hand on her waist. Call it cuddling, or whatever. Either way, I didn't expect Michaela and I to end up in this situation. So many of my fantasies involved this, but in none of them was I so frozen by the fear of making the wrong move. I imagined her waking up screaming and running to the door. Suddenly, I felt her hand slide under my shirt and slowly begin to stroke my stomach, her hand on my bare skin. I allowed myself to move my leg slightly and felt her silky, smooth leg rubbing against mine. Unable to help myself, hugging her, I allowed myself to put my palm on the small of her back and lightly stroke it over her t-shirt. At the same time, I tucked a couple of strands of her hair that were bothering me behind her ear. To top it all off, Michaela let out a contented purr in her sleep. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It could be 2 minutes or 20. Either way, it was both bliss and pure agony. To be able to live out an impossible fantasy and at the same time be so aroused that it almost hurts and not even be able to erase it. However, the spell was broken when almost immediately I felt my entire body tense. Her hand was already lazily stroking my chest under my shirt when she suddenly froze in place. Her leg tensed next to mine before slowly retreating to her side of the bed, and I could have sworn that she even stopped breathing. Almost instinctively, I did the same and pretended to be asleep. She didn't move an inch for almost 30 seconds, while I tried my best to pretend to be asleep. After a few more moments, no doubt, spent trying to figure out if I was dreaming, her body relaxed again, and, to my surprise, she remained exactly as she was, that is, curled up in a warm embrace. Her hand slowly but with purpose began to stroke up and down my torso. Suddenly she froze again. It took me a few moments to understand why. Her hand rested on the left side of my chest, and for someone who should have been sleeping, my heart was beating a mile a minute. "Are you awake?" she whispered. I hesitated a little before answering, "No." Suddenly her hand slipped out from under my shirt, and she awkwardly trudged back to her side of the bed, neither of us making eye contact. "Sorry, she faltered. "It's okay. Everything was fine." "Cute?" she asked, clearing her throat and running all 10 fingers through her hair. I turned to her and she did the same. "I should have listened to you. I should have just found another hotel," I muttered. "No, Nate, stop it," she said. "I'm glad we didn't do that." She smiled at me and I instantly melted. In a split second, I assessed the situation and decided to act. I leaned over and kissed her. She was clearly taken by surprise and lay motionless for a second. The pure ecstasy of feeling soft, wet lips on mine was quickly overcome by the wave of horror that washed over me as I felt her lips and body being motionless, and I feared that I had misunderstood the situation. But when I was about to pull away, her lips parted slightly. I felt her hands on me, and we pressed ourselves against each other. The sensations were almost overwhelming. I came to terms with the fact that Michaela and I kissed with her hands already on me. I quickly realized that I could do the same and hastily slipped my hand under her shirt. It was almost like an electric shock to Michaela, who suddenly pulled away from the kiss and from me and protested with a stream of inarticulate nonsense. "I'm sorry, I can't, she muttered. "I'm married, damn it, I'm married. Oh God, I'm married." If before my heart was pounding wildly, now it was almost on the verge of a heart attack. I pressed my hands to my chest, almost like a criminal being arrested. At that moment, I didn't dare touch her. Michaela simply closed her eyes and covered her face with both hands. We both froze in place for a few seconds before I took the initiative, sat up, and began to climb out of bed. Suddenly, she reached out and grabbed my thigh to stop me. "Stop. Don't go." "What?" I exclaimed incredulously. "It's still so early. Don't get up because of me." "What? Do you want to lie together?" I chuckled nervously. "No, of course not." "Well, maybe, I don't know," she muttered, choosing her words carefully. "It's still so early, but we had a late night. If you want to stay, I trust you." "Well, I don't." "You do not trust me?" she asked, confused. "No, I don't trust myself, especially with you." "What are you talking about?" "You know perfectly well. You know I'm crazy about you. I mean, damn it, Michaela, I've never been subtle about this, but you're married, so I'll never be able to afford it, and I know you won't either. It was just a stupid, clumsy mistake, and we shouldn't mention it again. But if we stay here, I won't be able to help myself. What if I wanted this? she asked, almost without hesitation. What? So that you can help yourself, she said slowly. If you feel that way, what the hell was that reaction? I, I'm a girl. What are you waiting for? We may get confused. So, I began nervously. Come here, she said quietly. And here it is, the green light. Against all odds, we find ourselves in this ridiculous situation, and from all possible options, it now offers itself. Against all odds. It was stupid, but I said, I don't have a condom. Michaela sighed loudly, turned away from me, lay back on her back, and stared at the ceiling. At that moment, I was sitting, half out of bed. Reluctantly, I finally decided to stand up when, without warning, she reached between my legs and grabbed my crotch. I took a sharp breath, and all I could squeeze out was, "Oh!" I took this as permission to lie down on the bed next to her. I turned to look at her, but her reaction was completely emotionless. She did as she moved her hand up to the waistband of my shorts and slipped her hands inside. She rummaged around a little and grabbed my dignity with her hands. Lord, I muttered. I craned my head to look down and could hardly believe it. Almost instinctively, I turned and leaned towards her to kiss her on the lips. She quietly tried to move away, gently placing her free hand on my face and turning it back towards the ceiling. It's okay. Close your eyes. I have you, she said casually. I could hear my breathing getting heavier and heavier as she moved faster and faster, but the fact that Michaela was doing it made it even more enjoyable. While this was happening, I blindly reached out my hand and felt her thigh. I followed the curves of her body until I felt the waistband of her shorts under my fingers. Michaela cleared her throat and said quietly, "It's okay. You don't need to—" "Shut up," I answered just as quietly. I watched as her gaze flickered downward for a moment before looking back into her eyes. Neither of us looked away as I slid my hand into my shorts, and then deeper. As my breathing quickened, hers stopped. Without taking her unblinking eyes off me, she inhaled sharply. She suddenly pulled away. I was about to ask her to explain when she suddenly sat up and pulled back the sheets before reaching for the hem of her shirt and casually pulling it over her head. In an instant, we were both sitting naked in bed. For some time, we looked at each other in silence. She looked down before letting her gaze wander over my chest. I admired her firm, full, albeit smaller than expected bust. I moved towards her as she reached out, placed her hand on my chest, and pushed me back onto the mattress. She took the initiative. "Oh, fuck," I moaned with pleasure. I enjoyed it, but soon I needed to give her reciprocal caresses. Giving each other pleasure, we were both approaching the finish line. Wait, she stammered. "What? What's happened?" "Take me." "What?" "Take me now," she breathed, breathless. "You—" "Yes," she interrupted. "Hurry up, I'm so close." With that, I grabbed her ankles and we were reunited. Maybe she's married, maybe we don't have condoms, but at that moment I didn't care. She pulled me close to her as I worked at a steady rhythm. I continued my work. Part of me just wanted to make her feel unconscious. But even at that moment, I knew it might be fleeting, so I allowed myself a slow and steady pace. No matter how hard I try, I won't last long. These were years of creation, years of admiring her from afar, years of fantasizing about her in waking moments, and years of wanting to drunkenly kiss her all those nights. All of this was built on this. We both moaned at the same time. I moved faster and faster, and we both came to the finish line. We held each other tightly, not daring to move. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It seemed like an eternity had passed. We stayed like that for some time. By this time, the sun had truly risen, and footsteps were heard in the hotel corridor. Michaela and I remained lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. "What now, Nate?" "I still can't breathe. That's what." "But what will happen then? What do we do?" "I don't know," I said, and leaned back to look into her eyes. "It's up to you, but I have no intention of ruining your marriage." "Really?" she asked, raising an eyebrow doubtfully. Is it true? I'm always honest with you. Do you want me? Yes, I answered. If it were up to me, we would repeat this tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and then. I would like to be with you until the end of time. I care about you. But you're married. So that's my problem. I just have to do my best to overcome this. Can you do it? I will try. I have to. I don't regret that we did it, she said with surprising confidence, before adding, at least not now. But will you forgive me if we never talk about this again? Do you love your husband? Yes, despite this. And I know we've only been married about 18 months, and that does not bode well for us. She chuckled nervously. But yes, I love him. Please do not be angry. I can't be mad at you for being honest. You can ask me anything, Nate. I thought about questions that could potentially lead me somewhere with her. Questions that could prolong our little flirtation. The ones that can make her doubt her marriage and later fall back into my arms. Instead, either out of friendship or just childish lust, I asked, "When did you lose your virginity?" The question took her by surprise, but she answered fairly quickly. When I was 16. How many sexual partners have you had? Only 4, more precisely 5, if you count you. Does your husband satisfy you? Yes. Does he make you reach your peak? Sometimes. And are we going to have sex? She answered all other questions without hesitation. This time she paused for a very long time as she said carefully, "We shouldn't. I didn't ask you about that." I know, but anyway, this is the answer. We shouldn't. So please don't tempt me. I'm married, but I don't think I can handle it. Why not? Isn't this a game? I don't know. I love my husband, but this is completely different, in a good way. But I love him. Then, that's all, I answered casually, hiding my disappointment. Yes, probably. We both remained on the bed, staring at the ceiling. It seemed that this was the end. Part of my thought is to take one last look at her before reaching for her clothes. Instead, she said nervously, "Well, of course." What do you mean, of course? There is something to be said for getting it out of our system. You know, while we're in another city and we're sitting together in a hotel room, she said slyly. I straightened up and looked down at her. She smiled, waiting for me to say next. Our flight is this afternoon. All this time we don't eat, don't watch TV, don't leave this room, don't put on a single piece of clothing. I want to touch you wherever I want, whenever I want. I want to be able to possess you in every way and remember it. And we don't stop until it's absolutely necessary. What then? And then we'll stop, I said firmly. We'll find out the rest later. At least this way, if we never talk about it again, we at least have one hell of a memory. Michaela nodded slightly, reached out her hand, and began to caress my face. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. The office paid for first-class plane tickets, but given that we missed the flight, we were resigned to the savings. After spending several hours having sex in a spacious hotel room, it took some getting used to. On the other hand, Michaela and I remained close, although fully clothed. "How do you get home from the airport?" she asked. "I'll take an Uber." "You?" "My husband will pick me up." "And what?" "Nothing." "Tell me." "I'm not going to lie. Part of me is thinking about the best way to bring you back to me." At first, she didn't answer. She just started moving forward on her butt for a few seconds before saying, "We were talking about it." "I know, and don't worry, everything is very clear. You don't have to worry about me, it's just, "No what? I will remember it. And when I remember, I don't know how it will make me feel." "Yes, I understand what you mean. I keep wondering what will happen to him next time." "With husband?" I asked, to which she nodded in response. I looked around the plane, and between the noise of the engines, those wearing headphones and those who were sleeping, I felt comfortable enough to ask her, "Will he want to have sex when you get home from the airport?" Michaela also looked around the plane before calming down and answering, I've been gone all week. How will you do it?" "Probably just a boring old missionary. Nothing special." In the end, I was tired. But can I ask you something? Anything, I answered. Don't act weird at work on Monday. In terms of, this means that you cannot brag to others, remember about ours, or on the contrary, feel too awkward and avoid me altogether. No need. It may be difficult, but I want to remain friends, or at least I want to do my best. Almost instinctively, I leaned in to kiss her. She didn't pull away. On the contrary, she almost closed her eyes and pursed her lips. But we both caught ourselves and laughed awkwardly. And in the spirit of awkwardness, I extended my hand to her. She laughed and shook it. Home sweet home. I didn't check my email, unpack my things, or get ready. Instead, I simply undressed and collapsed on the bed. It was a long business trip, but falling asleep was difficult. Instead, my thoughts raced again. I met her husband at the airport at the baggage carousel. I shook his hand firmly and exchanged pleasantries, but otherwise gave way to them and stepped aside. Thinking about them now, from the comfort of my bed, I wondered if she was right in her predictions. At this moment, the husband laid her on the marital bed. What was she thinking? Was she thinking about me or her husband? I don't think I'll ever know the answer to these questions. I closed my eyes, and images of Michaela in all her naked glory filled my mind. I wonder what it will be like to see her at work again on Monday. I began to think about my first words. What to say? To be honest, I didn't know. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.